Okay, this is Double Helix Review. I'm Janice McCoy, and this is Jung-Ah Kim, reviewing The Martian by Andy Weir.
Right, so let's tell you very quickly what this book is about. So it's an exciting story of one man's fight for survival against daunting odds, alone on Mars with no prospect of rescue for years. It is the author's debut novel, originally published serially on his personal webpage, and now optioned by a major movie studio.
I love this story. It's like a Cinderella book story, right? Rescued
Yes.
from obscurity, and now he's going to make it big. Did it work for us?
I think yes.
I enjoyed it. This is a kind of Robinson Crusoe story set on Mars, and although that came to me spontaneously, I did some research, and I'm not the first one to make that connection. It's not a unique observation. The main character problem solves to stay alive in a hostile environment. Although, just as a side note, it doesn't have any of the problematic Robinson Crusoe issues with imperialism and racism and good stuff. So it's Mars. He's the only guy there. It also made me think of both Gravity and Apollo 13.
Yes.
In terms of movies. So we'll see if The Martian lives up to those.
Right.
But what are basically, I think, people would agree, successes, although not without their problems. Much of the story is first-person narration. So Mark, the main character, creates a diary. And so we're reading his diary. He's a castaway on Mars, basically.
Yeah.
And I found him clever. Not perfect. He has his flaws. So he's entertaining. His humor is sometimes a little bit childish, but
toilet humor. Sometimes.
Yeah, there's some toilet humor in there, but that felt very human and very real to me. And I was riveted by the ups and downs of his trials and tribulations.
Yes. I mean, I think it works because at the end of the day, even though it's based in space, in reality, it's the story of a person overcoming adversity by using his wits and daring to go against all the odds. Even though there's a huge amount of detail in the calculations and science involved, which I understand the writer worked really hard to make sure that they were correct. The real story here is about the personality of Mark, and maybe it's too much of a stretch if you say it's a metaphor perhaps for the human spirit. The rest of the crew, the personality of the members down on Earth also help the entertainment, and they're sources that diversify away from Mark. So this is the film Gravity, less weighed down, and more of George Clooney's banter.
Yeah. So what didn't work? There's always room for criticism, right? I had a hard time, though, coming up with things to criticize. If I had to pick something, I'd probably go with that sense of humor, that sort of quirky, slightly childish sense of humor. It comes up repeatedly in other characters, which, there's a whole universe of humor out there, and we all have our own takes. And this felt like maybe the author's sense of humor again and again, perhaps. Yeah. So it sort of flattened it and made it a little less realistic when these other characters popped up with that same jokey attitude. So the main character I found very real and very human, but the other was a little bit more generic, a little more interchangeable.
Yeah, I think that's very true. There is some kind of attempt to draw out the other characters, but it's not really memorable.
No.
And they're really used as props, I feel like, for the plot to advance.
Yeah.
And I personally would have preferred maybe a little bit less detail to the science, but I understand that this is a double-edged sword. It's part of the reason why the story feels more authentic, so I understand that. I did like the narrative. It was very much to the point. It was very much in character with Mark. It worked out very well, I think.
Yeah. And, just thinking about it now, there's a kind of a unique problem when you're telling a story of suspense in diary form.
Yes.
Because if something goes horribly wrong, the diary would just stop.
Clearly would not have been found.
Right, which again, well, they might have been found, right?
Well,
he even mentions that they can find it after he's gone, and he makes reference to it. So I think that's one of the reasons we need those other characters, because when we flip away, we don't know if we're getting back Mark or not ever.
That's true.
Right? So they add that element of suspense.
That's right. And actually, that's why I think that despite the plot's tendency to repeat itself, Mark gets into trouble, Mark solves the trouble, Mark gets into trouble again, and he solves it again.
Something goes wrong, he has to fix it. Something goes wrong, he has to fix it.
But I think, yes, there is that element of suspense that keeps the story going.
Yeah. I was never really sure if he was actually going to fix it. And if he did, how? How would you fix this?
Yeah. It's
So,
quite a big problem to fix.
yeah, many big problems. How do you live on Mars? I mean, there's no real atmosphere. There's nothing to eat. There's nothing to drink. Yeah. So that I found fascinating.
Yeah. So to conclude, we think it's the best fit for those readers who are interested in hardcore science fiction, or those who aren't but can tolerate it for a well-told, engaging story. And also bear in mind, there will be a film version coming out, so maybe it won't be such a bad idea to read it first to see how the original idea works.
I'm looking forward to that. We should do a podcast for the movie.
That should be very interesting.
Okay.
So that's our conclusion.